In the late 1980s, Dirty Dancing took the world by storm, with sizzling chemistry, unforgettable music, and dance scenes that made hearts race. The film quickly became a global phenomenon, catapulting Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze into stardom. But while viewers were swept away by the magic between Baby and Johnny, the truth behind the scenes was far from fairy tale perfect, especially during the making of the legendary Hungry Eyes montage. What the world didn't know was that Jennifer Grey was hiding a deep, personal secret, a truth that wouldn't come to light until years later. This revelation would change everything we thought we knew about the making of Dirty Dancing and the tension-filled relationship between its stars. Before Baby and Johnny ever took center stage, there was another film, Red Dawn, where their complicated history began, and it set the tone for everything that followed. When Jennifer Grey found out Patrick Swayze had been cast alongside her in Dirty Dancing, her heart sank. Their past together wasn't filled with warm memories or playful camaraderie. It was rooted in Red Dawn, a film where sparks didn't fly, at least not in a good way. Released in 1984, Red Dawn was a gritty Cold War action film that followed a group of high school students turned guerrilla fighters after the Soviet Union invades the US. The film was intense and dramatic, but the true drama, as it turns out, was unfolding behind the camera. The friction between Grey and Swayze during this time would set the stage for a turbulent working relationship. Patrick Swayze played Jed Eckhart, the tough, no-nonsense leader of the group, a role that mirrored his own intense personality at the time. Jennifer Grey, in a smaller role as Tony Mason, was among the young fighters. While the cast bonded over the grueling New Mexico shooting schedule, not everyone walked away from the experience as friends. Swayze, a trained dancer and former gymnast, was notorious for his work ethic, focused, disciplined, and unwavering. But that intensity could sometimes be overbearing. He stayed in character off camera, a method that worked for his action scenes but made it hard for others to feel at ease. For Jennifer Grey, however, this method acting was more than just a professional approach. It was a barrier that created an emotional divide. Her acting style couldn't have been more different. Grey was spontaneous, intuitive, and emotionally open. She relied on her instincts, and her free-flowing approach to acting clashed with Swayze's rigid, controlled manner. At one point during filming, she became frustrated with his constant joking and pranks, which interfered with her ability to stay in character during serious scenes. The clash of personalities was undeniable. Grey later admitted that while she found moments of Swayze's charm, overall, he was tough to work with. She described him as macho, sometimes overbearing, and a show-off, someone who always had to be in control, even when the cameras weren't rolling. For Jennifer Grey, working with Patrick Swayze felt like walking on eggshells. She never quite knew what mood he would be in or whether he would take her seriously. After Red Dawn wrapped, she swore she'd never have to work with him again. Little did she know, fate had other plans. When the casting team for Dirty Dancing began their search for the lead roles, the stakes were high. They needed a chemistry between Baby and Johnny that was electric, raw, and filled with tension. It had to feel real, the kind of emotional connection that could pull the audience in and never let go. Jennifer Grey had already secured the role of Francis, Baby, Houseman, but finding the right Johnny proved to be a monumental task. The man needed to exude charisma, masculinity, and, most importantly, real dance training. But there was one name that stood out, Patrick Swayze. The producers knew he had the look and the skill, but for Jennifer Grey, it was more complicated. Their past was still fresh in her mind. Red Dawn had left scars that hadn't fully healed. The thought of working with him again made her uneasy. When his name came up for the role of Johnny Castle, Jennifer Grey instantly felt a wave of discomfort. She made it clear to the casting team that she wasn't sure about working with him again. But the producers were determined. They believed Swayze was the only actor who could match the intensity, both physically and emotionally, that the role required. Despite Jennifer's hesitation, they decided to invite him to the auditions. Then, just before their screen test together, something unexpected happened. Patrick Swayze pulled Jennifer aside, looked her in the eye, and apologized. His voice cracked, and tears welled up in his eyes. Jennifer Grey, though still guarded, saw something entirely different in him at that moment. Gone was the overbearing, macho actor from Red Dawn. He was vulnerable. "We could kill it. We could kill it if we do this," he told her. That single, honest moment changed everything. Against her better judgment, Jennifer Grey agreed to move forward with the screen test. What followed would alter everything. As they walked into the screen test together, something magical happened. The tension that had once been a wall between them suddenly melted into something far more powerful, an electric, undeniable energy. The producers were stunned. What they witnessed was no act. It was the real deal. Jennifer Grey's sweet, awkward energy perfectly collided with Swayze's commanding presence. Their chemistry was raw, and it felt alive. The roles were theirs. Their connection was undeniable, yet the friction that started during Red Dawn still lingered. It hadn't disappeared, it had only been buried, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And when they began filming Dirty Dancing, it did just that. What was once unresolved tension would soon spill over, making the set feel more like a battlefield than a place to create magic. The road ahead wasn't going to be smooth. Production moved to Lake Lowell, North Carolina, where conditions would test everyone's limits. The weather was muggy, humid, and stifling, adding another layer of pressure to an already volatile situation. Filming Dirty Dancing was far from glamorous. The budget was tight, and the clock was always ticking. Cast and crew found themselves working long hours in blistering heat, with little room for error. The sets were bare bones, costumes were recycled, and locations sometimes felt like they might fall apart at any moment. Even Patrick Swayze wasn't immune to the grueling conditions. He injured his knee during filming, forcing the production schedule to shift as they worked around his recovery. Meanwhile, Jennifer Grey still felt the weight of their past clashes, unsure whether she could fully trust Swayze's unpredictable nature. Balancing the pressures of the lead role with her personal history became an emotional rollercoaster. Yet, amid all this discomfort, a story about love, class, and rebellion was beginning to take shape. But the real drama, it wasn't just on screen. Behind the scenes of Dirty Dancing, the tension would grow to be as unforgettable as what audiences saw on the big screen. When filming officially began, the fragile unity between Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze from the screen test quickly started to unravel. The emotional apology and the undeniable chemistry between them had been real, but they couldn't erase the deep-seated personalities that had collided years earlier. On set, it didn't take long for the divide between Grey's tender, intuitive approach and Swayze's perfectionist, trained style to resurface. With every scene, the tension was palpable. Patrick Swayze brought years of dance training to the table. A classically trained ballet dancer, he had performed professionally before transitioning to acting. Jennifer Grey, on the other hand, had no formal dance background. She was passionate, expressive, and emotionally connected to her role, but she often struggled to keep up with the choreography and rhythm. This difference soon became a major source of frustration, not just for her, but for Swayze as well. Scene after scene had to be reshot, sometimes dozens of times. Jennifer Grey would break into nervous laughter mid-take or find herself struggling to catch the rhythm. Patrick Swayze, a disciplined performer with high expectations, had little patience for these hiccups. The pressure was relentless. According to crew members, some days the tension was so thick that the two would barely speak to each other, glaring in silence just before the cameras rolled. But once action was called, they'd dive into their roles, using their anger and awkwardness to fuel the romantic tension that would later captivate audiences. This wasn't just creative differences at play. Jennifer Grey sometimes felt that Swayze's approach crossed the line from passionate to overbearing. In dance rehearsals, he often took charge, correcting her form or adjusting her performance in ways that made her feel undermined and belittled. Grey worked from instinct, tapping into her emotional connection to the character, while Swayze relied on precision and technique. Their differing methods weren't just a clash of approaches, they were a battle of egos. Crew members recalled moments when they had to separate the two between takes. Though Swayze's skill and drive were respected, some felt he came off as controlling, particularly in how he handled Grey. Behind closed doors, Jennifer Grey would express her frustration, admitting she often felt overshadowed by Swayze's dominant presence. She didn't want to be a puppet dancing to his lead, she wanted to be a partner in the performance. Ironically, this very tension would become the secret ingredient that gave the film its raw, emotional power. When Baby looks nervous or tense around Johnny in Dirty Dancing, it wasn't just acting. The emotional energy between Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze wasn't scripted, it was raw, unscripted, and deeply real. And yet, there was one scene where all that tension, all the friction, and even the mistrust seemed to explode into something unforgettable. It became the most iconic moment in the film, and it was also one of the hardest to shoot, the lift scene. The lift scene in Dirty Dancing is undeniably iconic. It's been recreated, parodied, and admired for decades, but few know just how much real emotional tension and fear surrounded the moment behind the scenes. The scene required Jennifer Grey to sprint into Patrick Swayze's arms, where he would lift her into the air, over his head. This moment required not only perfect timing and strength but, most importantly, trust. And at that point in the shoot, trust was in short supply. Jennifer Grey had never performed the lift before. What's even more surprising is that she refused to rehearse it. She was terrified, Despite being an experienced actress, Jennifer Grey had a deep fear of being dropped or injured. Patrick Swayze, with his perfectionist mindset and dancer's discipline, found her reluctance incredibly frustrating. He believed in repetition, in practicing until it was flawless, while Jennifer Grey was relying on instinct and adrenaline to carry her through. The filming conditions added even more pressure to the already intense scene. Unlike earlier rehearsals in the freezing lake, the iconic final lift was filmed indoors. But it came with its own set of nerves because it had to be perfect, no exceptions. Earlier dance scenes had already hinted at the mounting pressure. One memorable scene, where Johnny runs his hand down Baby's arm, wasn't scripted to be as it turned out. Jennifer Grey couldn't stop giggling during take after take, and Patrick Swayze became livid. He couldn't understand why she couldn't just hold it together. Director Emil Artolino often encouraged improvisation, keeping the cameras rolling even when the actors went off script. One example of this was the scene where Jennifer Grey was supposed to stand in front of Swayze, her back to him, and raise her arm behind his head as he trailed his fingers down her arm, reminiscent of the iconic poster pose. What was meant to be a tender moment, however, became a comedic one. Grey was exhausted and found the move ticklish, which led to uncontrollable giggles during every take. Swayze's patience wore thin, and the tension between them grew. However, the producers decided the scene worked, despite all the laughter. They chose to keep Grey's giggles and Swayze's annoyed expression in the film, seeing something real and raw in the moment. That's the beauty of Dirty Dancing. What was messy behind the scenes became part of the magic on screen. And when it came time to film the iconic final lift, they nailed it in one take. No rehearsal, just pure tension and adrenaline. And somehow, it worked. The shot became the emotional climax of the movie, and the scene has remained a favorite for audiences ever since. But the underlying tension was far from over. Earlier, during the Hungry Eyes montage, the emotional strain between Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze reached its boiling point. What happened during this sequence was something Jennifer Grey kept to herself for years, a story she didn't share until much later. And when she finally did, the response was explosive. What Grey had concealed was the disgusting behavior that had been brewing beneath the surface. The Hungry Eyes montage is widely remembered as one of the film's most sensual, playful moments, a blossoming romance captured to Eric Carmen's unforgettable tune. The scene is light-hearted, filled with flirtation, shy glances, teasing touches, and synchronized dance moves. But behind the camera, the reality was far more complicated. By this point in filming, Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze were barely holding it together. While viewers saw chemistry, the truth was that emotional strain had been simmering for weeks. Grey, already fragile from the long hours and ongoing tensions with her co-star, was pushed to her limit during this sequence. The scene required repeated physical closeness and genuine romantic tension, something that became harder and harder to fake. Patrick Swayze, growing more frustrated with each delay and hesitation, found every missed cue and every giggle more irritating than the last. According to crew members, the tension between Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze continued to escalate behind the scenes. Swayze's frustration began to show between takes. He was reportedly muttering under his breath, rolling his eyes, and snapping at others. His tone became cold, and on one occasion, he even stormed off set, requiring others to talk him into returning. Jennifer Grey, meanwhile, kept her distance and remained quiet. She could sense the growing disdain, especially during scenes where their bodies had to be pressed close. But she remained silent, understanding the stakes. Speaking up could jeopardize the movie, and worse, her career. The set was already a pressure cooker due to the tight schedule and limited budget, and Grey feared being seen as difficult if she voiced her concerns. It wasn't until decades later, in a candid interview, that Jennifer Grey revealed her painful experience. Her words were blunt, raw, and heartbreaking. She described Swayze's coldness as disgusting, recounting how his gaze, which was supposed to be smoldering in the scene, instead felt condescending and resentful. What audiences didn't know was that the emotional weight Jennifer Grey carried was buried deep beneath the smiles and playful choreography. The chemistry between Baby and Johnny was real, but not in the way viewers imagined. The Hungry Eyes montage, one of the most memorable sequences in cinematic history, was far more complicated than it seemed. While it captured the playful, flirtatious moments of their budding romance, it was also filled with real emotional tension. The friction between the two actors wasn't just part of their performances. It was raw frustration and restraint, a product of months of simmering discomfort. And it wasn't just emotional tension. The producers were starting to worry. There were concerns that the growing animosity between Grey and Swayze might jeopardize the more intimate love scenes, and the escalating personal conflict could ruin the film's success. To address this, writer Eleanor Bergstein and director Emil Ardolino took a bold step. They decided to have Grey and Swayze rewatch their initial screen tests, the ones where their chemistry had been undeniable. This proved to be a turning point. The actors returned to the film with renewed energy and a shared understanding, and the magic began to flow again. After filming the climactic dance finale, including the iconic lift scene, the production finally wrapped, and Dirty Dancing moved into post-production. The film was almost ready to meet the world, but no one could have predicted the massive success that would follow. When Dirty Dancing hit theaters in August 1987, it seemed like just another low-budget film with no big stars. Set in the early 1960s with a simple love story, the film didn't seem poised for greatness. Yet something about it struck a chord with audiences. Word spread quickly, and in just a few weeks, the film became a box office sensation, eventually grossing over $214 million worldwide. What started as a quiet release soon became a cultural phenomenon. Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze were suddenly global icons. Audiences fell in love with the story of Baby and Johnny, two mismatched lovers brought together by the power of dance. The soundtrack went multi-platinum, and songs like "I've Had the Time of My Life" became staples on the radio. The film won an Academy Award for Best Original Song and a Golden Globe, cementing its place as a beloved classic. But while the public marveled at the undeniable chemistry between Grey and Swayze, the emotional truth behind their performances remained hidden. Jennifer Grey later admitted that making Dirty Dancing was emotionally challenging. The personal discomfort, tensions, and struggles were hard to forget. Over time, however, she recognized how these challenges contributed to the film's rawness and honesty. The chemistry on screen wasn't just great acting, it was real, which is why audiences connected so deeply. Despite their difficult dynamic during filming, both Grey and Swayze came to appreciate the magic they created together. In 2004, they reunited for a Dirty Dancing-themed documentary, where Grey spoke respectfully of Swayze's dedication, and Swayze, before his passing in 2009, praised her emotional vulnerability and growth. He even acknowledged that he might have been too hard on her during filming, quietly addressing their unresolved tension. The film reshaped both of their careers. For Grey, Baby became her defining role, though she struggled to shed the innocent girl image. Swayze, meanwhile, became a Hollywood icon with hits like Ghost and Point Break. Yet, they would always be remembered as Baby and Johnny. Looking back, Dirty Dancing wasn't just a movie, it was a moment in time, capturing millions of hearts while hiding the emotional toll behind its creation. The film was full of tension, missed cues, giggles, and frustrating rehearsals. One moment symbolizing this struggle was a failed screen test that nearly ended everything before it began. Thankfully, director Emil Ardolino moved forward with a second test, which proved Swayze and Grey were the perfect match for Johnny and Baby. Dirty Dancing didn't just make them legends, it created a lasting legacy that endures today, nearly 40 years later. Grey's reflections over time have been filled with grace and honesty, recognizing that their shared struggles made their on-screen connection so authentic. After Swayze's cancer diagnosis, Grey reached out to him privately, calling him a rare and beautiful person, complicated but kind. This transformation in their relationship, from tension to mutual respect, helped them both see that their past conflicts had made their partnership even more powerful and real. Patrick Swayze's passing in 2009 deeply impacted Jennifer Grey, and over time, she became more open about their relationship during Dirty Dancing's filming. Despite calling him disgusting in earlier interviews, she now speaks with great respect, acknowledging that their volatile dynamic was crucial to the authenticity of their performances. Dirty Dancing remains one of the most iconic films ever, with its story of forbidden love transcending its humble beginnings to become a cultural touchstone. The hidden tensions behind the scenes only added to its energy and emotional depth. Jennifer Grey's decision to keep the pain of their relationship hidden allowed the raw emotion to shine through, creating a lasting connection with audiences. The legacy of Dirty Dancing shows how real emotion, whether pain or joy, can turn art into something unforgettable. The film's continued appeal proves that vulnerability and tension create something truly meaningful. What are your thoughts on Dirty Dancing? Did you notice the emotional depth behind the performances? Feel free to share in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.